After parting ways with Bai Yaoyi at Kunwu Mountain, Hanli, now at the mid-nascent soul stage, after refining numerous treasures, saw his power increase tremendously after many years. When these two meet again, what will the scene be like? In order to find the profound ice flower, Hanli made a special trip to the North Leaf Minor Polar Palace. To visit this beautiful woman, led by the cultivator surnamed Ren, he discovered within the inner sanctum of the Minor Polar Palace the Su Ling Temple, which looked similar to the Sucha Temple. This left Hanli utterly shocked. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Oh, is fellow Taoist Han interested in them? However, unless something major happens, these three great halls always remain sealed. Only with the joint approval of more than half of the elders, can the Su Ling Temple be opened. As for the reasons why, I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to say. The cultivator surnamed Ren, seeing that Hanli was quite interested in these three great halls, gave a mysterious smile. Seeing the other man's expression, Hanli chuckled. He immediately decided not to ask any more questions. To ask any further would be to risk prying into the secrets of another sect. That was a major taboo. Besides, even if the three great halls were truly related to the Sucha Temple, it had nothing to do with him anymore. The Sucha Temple's most important treasure, the Sucha Cauldron, was already in his possession. Fellow Taoist Han, please follow me. The Baning Pavilion is over there. It seems junior sister Bai holds you in very high regard. Fellow Taoist Han, this pavilion is where she exclusively receives her closest friends. It's quite elegant and tranquil. The cultivator surnamed Ren seemed to know a great deal about Bai Yaoyi's affairs. Is that so? I'm truly flattered. Hanli gave a faint smile. Cultivator Ren gave a sly chuckle and flew with Hanli towards the side of a mountain cliff. Finally, they landed in front of a pavilion. This pavilion had 3 stories, each one over 10 jong high. It was constructed entirely from emerald green wood, with the greater part of it embedded in the cliff face. And above the pavilion's main gate, there was a light yellow plaque on which was written the 3 large, silver characters for Bai Ning Pavilion. The moment they landed, a woman in white robes immediately emerged from the pavilion to greet them. Greetings, Martial Uncle Ren. This must be Senior Han. Correct. This elegant-looking woman, upon seeing Cultivator Ren and Hanli together, was startled for a moment, but she immediately spoke with reverence. Indeed, is Fairy Bai inside? My master has just finished her seclusion, the woman replied calmly. She is currently in the pavilion stabilizing her magical power. She specially sent me to welcome you, Senior Han. I hope you won't take offense, Senior. The beautiful woman stepped to one side, clearing the path behind her, but she showed no intention of inviting Cultivator Ren in. Disciple, I need to see your master. I have something to say to her, Cultivator Ren said without a second thought. Martial Uncle Ren, you're putting me in a difficult position. You know that master gave orders long ago. She does not wish to see you again. Last time, when Martial Sister Gong let you in to see her, she was severely punished for it afterward. The beautiful woman did not seem surprised by this, but upon hearing his words, she gave a bitter smile, her face filled with helplessness. This time is different. I came with Brother Han. Surely your master wouldn't refuse to see Brother Han as well, would she? A blush appeared on Cultivator Ren's face, but after a quick glance around, he brazenly used Hanli as leverage. Hanli, who had been listening from the side, felt the corner of his mouth twitch. However, he didn't feel it was his place to say anything. The beautiful woman's expression became hesitant. However, let Martial Uncle Ren in. Let me see her. A pleasant female voice suddenly came from the loft above. It was Bai Yaoyi's voice. Emi Ifu. Let Senior Brother Ren please come in. Emi Ifu's expression relaxed. She retreated a few steps to the side, no longer blocking Ren Bai's way. When Ren Bai heard Bai Yaoyi's voice transmission, a hint of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. He moved his lips slightly to send a message back, while still outside the pavilion, looking as if he wanted to converse with Bai Yaoyi via voice transmission. Ren Bai, Senior Brother, if you have something to say, let's discuss it inside the pavilion. Leaving fellow Taoist Han like this, stranded outside, doesn't it make RZG Palace seem terribly impolite? Bai Yaoyi's cool voice came through once more, with not a single hint that she had forgotten Hanli. Hearing this, Hanli stroked his chin and smiled without saying a word. That was my oversight. Brother Han, let's talk after we get inside. Ren Bai was taken aback for a moment, then said to Hanli with embarrassment, Not at all, Brother Ren, I can tell you're a straightforward person, Hanli replied with a grin. Now he was finally beginning to understand why, upon hearing he was here to visit Bai Yaoyi, this fellow had been so eager to get friendly with him. It seemed this man had quite the interest in her. This made Hanli lower his guard considerably. Led by Emi Ifu, the two of them walked into the Baining Pavilion. The first floor of the pavilion wasn't very large, just a square space a little over 20 yards wide. There was a simple set of green bamboo tables and chairs, but in each of the four corners was a planter. Inside were pale yellow, scale-like flowers that Hanli didn't recognize. They were the size of a fist, and their fragrance filled the air, making the pavilion brim with spiritual energy. Even Hanli couldn't help but take a second look. Bai Yaoyi did not come down right away, but just as Hanli and Renbai sat down in the main chairs, the woman's apologetic voice immediately came from above. Please, wait just a moment. My cultivation technique is a bit special. I'll be finished circulating my energy shortly, and I can come down to meet you. Fellow Taoist Han, why don't you first try RZG Palace's brink? As soon as she finished speaking, the well-prepared beautiful woman immediately clapped her hands lightly. Instantly, two young women in white robes walked in from outside the pavilion. Each held a mahogany tray in their hands. On each tray was a cluster of thumb-sized, gold and silver berries, plump and alluring, just like pearls. After placing the wooden trays on the table next to the bamboo chair, the two women respectfully withdrew. The brink fruit is exclusive to RZG Palace. Even for us palace elders, we don't get more than a few clusters each year. This fruit is fresh, delicious, and sweet. Moreover, it contains an extremely pure and icy spiritual energy. If a cultivator who practices an ice attribute technique consumes it regularly, it can also be beneficial for their cultivation. The beautiful woman looked at the fruit and began to explain it to Hanli. Then, she picked one up and tossed it into her mouth and began to chew. Seeing her do this, Hanli naturally didn't stand on ceremony either. He also picked one and put it in his mouth. As soon as he bit into it, a ball of icy cold energy immediately rolled around in his mouth. It was indeed a pure and potent icy energy. Although Hanli didn't cultivate an ice attribute technique, he possessed the violet apex fire and the supreme yin true flame, two flames that countered the cold. He naturally wouldn't be bothered by this small amount of cold energy. As soon as this ball of spiritual energy went down his throat, it was completely absorbed. Intrigued, he picked up another one and tossed it into his mouth again. The beautiful woman, who was watching Hanli from the side, saw this scene, but his expression couldn't help but shift slightly. You see, although the ice condensation fruit wasn't well known, consuming it had certain benefits for any cultivator. But for cultivators who didn't practice ice or fire attribute techniques, consuming it would certainly require a process to convert the cold energy. Otherwise, if swallowed rashly, it would be extremely easy to freeze one's own kidneys. However, the spiritual power that Hanli had previously emitted was clearly a very pure wood attribute spiritual power. For him to be able to swallow this fruit without any hesitation was truly quite unexpected. As for consuming two ice condensation fruits in a row, even he, who practices a fire tribute technique, would not dare to do such a thing. Just as this CG Gong elder was secretly marveling in his heart, footsteps were heard from the upper floor of the pavilion. A beautiful woman in a white dress descended gracefully from the stairs. Hanli's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately stood up. With a hearty laugh, he said, "Fairy Bai, it's been over 10 years since we last met. I trust you've been well. Junior sister Bai, you're finally willing to see me." Renbai also stood up, overjoyed, and said, "Since the day we parted, I knew Brother Han wouldn't arrange a meeting without reason. Several years ago, I was already in the palace, waiting for my fellow Taoist to visit. For you to only arrive today, my fellow Taoist, is already somewhat beyond my expectations. As for you, Senior Brother Ren, if it weren't for Brother Han this time, I, your junior sister, really had no desire to see you again." Bai Yaoyi said this to Hanli with a radiant smile. But the moment she turned to face Renbai, her expression immediately turned stern. At the same time, her voice became several degrees colder. "I've found a solution this time. I definitely won't disappoint you, junior sister," Renbai said urgently, his brow furrowed. "You found a solution? If it's just about this matter, we can talk about it later. Fellow Taoist Han has traveled a long way. Let's put this matter aside for now." Bai Yaoyi shook her head. "This is fine as well, Brother Wei can find another opportunity later to discuss this with junior sister in detail. Now that she's willing to see me again, Brother Wei is already very gratified. Ren Biwen's expression turned serious, but he immediately seemed to understand something. He said with an apologetic smile. Bai Yaoyi showed no expression. She just nodded and sat down on the main seat in the pavilion. Hanli and the other person also retook their seats. Fairy Bai's cultivation has improved significantly compared to 10 years ago. After sizing up Bai Yaoyi for a few moments, Hanli said with a smile, Brother Han, you're being too kind. In terms of divine abilities alone, even two of me combined would be no match for you, fellow Taoist. Bai Yaoyi replied with a pleasant smile. Regarding Hanli's performance that day in the Yin-Yang Grotto and on Kunwu Mountain, this woman remembers it as if it were yesterday. Therefore, she treated Hanli's arrival with extreme seriousness, not daring to show the slightest neglect. When Ren Biwen heard Bai Yaoyi praise Hanli so highly, his expression changed. He sized Hanli up again in surprise. Bai Yaoyi, however, continued to speak to Hanli as early as 10 years ago. Brother Han, you mentioned to me that you would pay a visit to this palace. For you to have said such a thing back then, fellow Taoist, it probably wasn't without reason, was it? Since fellow Taoist Bai has asked, I won't hide it any longer and will speak frankly. I have come to the Minor Expanse Palace because I actually have a favor to ask of you, Fairy Bai. Hanli just pondered for a moment, then replied with a smile, Brother Han, that great kindness you showed me back then, I have never forgotten it. Fellow Taoist, please, just ask. Bai Yaoyi said without hesitation. As for me, even if Hanli hadn't done me the kindness of rescuing me from being frozen in ice, just based on the other party's almost comparable, terrifying mystical arts of late-stage refinement, I would also do my utmost to help. After all, to be able to befriend a cultivator with such mystical arts, he would absolutely be willing. It's actually not a big deal. I have heard that northern Nether Island is rich in mystic ice flowers, this type of spiritual herb, and I need to concoct a spiritual elixir that happens to require this flower as the main ingredient. So, I had no choice but to make this trip. Hanli said with a calm expression, Mystic ice flowers, those are indeed not easy to find. Although not many people can use this spiritual herb, the ones that are ancient have more or less all been picked. However, I can have my disciples check to see if they have recently found any 10,000-year-old mystic ice. Only on newly discovered mystic ice is it possible for this flower to grow. This shouldn't be a problem. As soon as Bai Yaoyi heard Hanli's request, she immediately felt it was not a problem, and happily agreed. It's wonderful that Fairy Bai is willing to help. If this matter were left to me, it would be quite troublesome. Hanli's heart eased, and with a smile on his face, he said, This is a small matter, but I'm afraid it will take more than a day or two to get any news. Since you have come to our minor exalted palace, Brother Han, why not stay for a few more days? This humble one is deeply impressed by your mystical arts, Brother Han. It's a great opportunity to have a good exchange with you, fellow Taoist, about our learnings. The woman said with a beaming smile, I am also very interested in your palace's cultivation methods. I have long heard that, when it comes to cold attribute cultivation methods, the top-tier techniques of the minor exalted palace are said to be the best in the Great Jin. Although what I cultivate is not of the ice-cold attribute, all laws and techniques in the world are interconnected. I'm sure I can also benefit greatly from it. Hanli said with a smile. After a few such questions and answers, the woman and Hanli couldn't help but start chatting, because their cultivation realms were close. After just a few words, they began to discuss cultivation matters. That Ren Bai was also at the mid-nascent soul stage. He would chime in at appropriate times, and he actually had some unique insights. This made the three of them get along splendidly, blurring the lines between host and guest. They had a very pleasant conversation. After the three of them had talked in the pavilion for a good part of the day, Hanli finally felt that since this woman had just come out of seclusion, it wouldn't be right to disturb her for too long, so he immediately took the initiative to take his leave. Seeing this, Bai Yaoyi did not insist that he stay, but she immediately gave an order, commanding that beautiful woman to take Hanli to the guest pavilion to stay for the time being, and to notify Hanli immediately once there was news of the profound ice. And so, Hanli received her promise. He immediately cupped his fist towards the two of them, and followed the beautiful woman out of the pavilion. Ren Bai, however, showed no intention of leaving right away. So, it's unknown what this martial brother and sister would continue to discuss. Led by that core formation stage beautiful woman, he headed straight for another area, a cluster of buildings right next to the mountain cliff. There were over a dozen exquisite and similar-looking pavilions. These seemed to be the so-called guest pavilions. Glancing from a distance, they headed towards one of them. The beautiful woman seemed to be very clear on Bai Yaoyi's high regard for Hanli. Therefore, she was exceptionally respectful towards Hanli along the way. The few questions he casually asked, this woman answered everything she knew, which made Hanli quite satisfied. In the blink of an eye, the two of them arrived in front of a pavilion. However, before they could even walk in, someone rushed out from this pavilion. It was a young woman with a baby face, dressed as a maid. She had a very petite figure. Greetings, Marshal Aunt Yan. This maid seemed to know the beautiful woman. Hurriedly came forward to see Marshal Nisli Daoa. This Senior Han is an honored guest of the Marshal grandmother. From now on, he will be living here. You are to serve him well. If you are neglectful in any way and he finds fault, even I will be punished along with you. The middle-aged woman instructed with a very serious expression. This junior will certainly do her best. Hearing this, the young woman was startled. She immediately replied respectfully. At the same time, she couldn't help but look up and glance at Hanli. Seeing that Hanli was sizing her up, she quickly lowered her head again. Hanli gave a slight smile upon seeing this. Senior Han, if you are not satisfied with Marshal Nishua, we can have someone else attend to your needs at any time, the woman said, turning to Hanli. No need. She will be fine. Hanli shook his head and strode into the pavilion. The two women immediately followed him in. The pavilion was arranged quite nicely, but what satisfied Hanli the most was the simple restrictive formation set up on the second floor. It would allow the cultivator residing here to not fear being spied upon by divine sense without their knowledge. Thus, after sending the middle-aged woman away with a few words, Hanli settled in. To be honest, since setting out from Snowy Lotus Mountain, he had been traveling almost non-stop. By now, he really needed to get some proper rest to restore himself to his peak condition. For 2 consecutive days, nothing happened. Hanli stayed on the second floor of the pavilion, quietly meditating and regulating his breathing. He did not casually leave the pavilion, because he was well aware that while it appeared he was staying here casually, in the shadows, who knew how many high-level cultivators of the Lesser Palace were watching his every move. After all, in any sect, when an outside nascent soul-level cultivator suddenly appears, it's impossible for them not to be on guard. He also had no intention of causing any trouble. Even though he was still concerned about news of the true Sunfire, he would absolutely not do anything before the profound ice pill was refined. Like acting rashly, in his mind, lifting Nangong Wan's soul-sealing curse was the #1 priority. As for the attendant specifically assigned to be at his beck and call, aside from speaking a few words at the beginning, Hanli hadn't given the woman any other orders. Thus, on the morning of the 3rd day, he was sitting quietly cross-legged on a meditation cushion, completely motionless. Suddenly, his expression shifted. A clear light flashed around Zhoushan. A series of rumbles erupted all around, as if something was exploding one after another. He then opened his eyes, his expression turning grim, because just a moment ago, a spiritual sense had brazenly pierced through the pavilion's restrictions and probed directly towards him. He had unceremoniously used a spell to repel it, but this spiritual sense was extremely powerful, no weaker than his own. It seemed to be the divine sense of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. As Hanli's mind raced, before he could figure out how to handle this, a wisp of a voice suddenly reached his ears, as faint as that of a weak infant. You must be fellow Taoist Han. I am Reverend Han Li. Would fellow Taoist be interested in a meeting? Hanli's heart skipped a beat. Wasn't this person the great elder of the ZG Palace? This person was quite a mysterious figure. Although everyone in the northern lands knew his spiritual powers were vast, strangely, no one had ever seen him make a move. It seemed his ascension to the position of great elder had also happened overnight. Hanli was surprised, but with his current level of power, he wasn't afraid of any late-stage cultivator. Therefore, after only a moment's hesitation, he decided to meet this person. He immediately sent a voice transmission to the spiritual sense circling nearby, saying, "Since you, fellow Taoist, have extended such a warm invitation, how could I possibly refuse? I shall come to pay my respects now, fellow Taoist." Heh heh, very good. My spirit beast will be there momentarily. Fellow Taoist Han, just follow the beast when it arrives. This old man will await your esteemed arrival at my residence. Seeing Hanli agree in a single breath, the Reverend accepted it. He seemed very pleased. His tone immediately became friendlier. Then, with a flash of white light, this wisp of spiritual sense dissipated and vanished. Hanli did not leave immediately. Instead, he stood in place for a good while, his eyes glinting. Only then did he slowly rise and head downstairs. The baby-faced attendant girl was sitting on a chair on the first floor, looking at a jade slip in her hand. When Hanli came down, she stood up in surprise. Hanli merely gave the girl a nod, then walked straight out of the pavilion's main door without giving her a second thought. The girl was completely baffled. She didn't know what had just happened. With her level of cultivation, it was naturally impossible for her to know about the clash of spiritual senses that had just occurred upstairs. When Hanli walked outside, he saw what he was looking for almost at a single glance. A small beast, resembling a large cat, was crouching on a branch of a small, nearby tree. Its two yellow glowing eyes fixed on Hanli. Its fur shimmered with a brilliant gold, looking as if it had been forged from pure gold. It was exceptionally eye-catching. He squinted his eyes and carefully sized up the small beast for a moment. A look of surprise gradually appeared on his face. A golden phoenix raccoon cat. To think it's this kind of rare beast. I've heard that this creature is a twin beast. When one appears, it's always as a male and female pair, using an art of concealment. It's said to be incredibly wondrous. I wonder if that's true or not. Hanli muttered to himself. His expression returned to normal, but he couldn't help but glance at the other trees. He didn't find anything. This golden Kirin, it seemed, had finally confirmed Hanli's identity. It let out a low whimper, and suddenly, a golden light flashed on a small, nearby tree. Another small beast actually shot out from the tree trunk. It was only about half a foot long, looking slightly smaller than the previous one. Hanli's heart skipped a beat. Even with his powerful divine sense, he hadn't seen how the little beast had been hiding inside the tree trunk. The two golden Kirins came together, rubbing their heads against each other. They immediately turned and ran in one direction. Hanli didn't have time to think. A spiritual light erupted from his body, and he transformed into a streak of clear light, closely pursuing the two beasts. Just as he was giving chase, an incredible scene occurred. The form of one of the golden Kirins blurred slightly, and right under Hanli's nose, it vanished without a trace. Hanli quickly scanned the area with his divine sense, but he couldn't find any sign of the beast. He gasped. Immediately after, unwilling to give up, he channeled all his spiritual power into his eyes. Instantly, his pupils flashed with blue light, and he scanned his surroundings relentlessly. Finally, near the other beast that was leading the way, he spotted an extremely blurry, almost invisible silhouette. It was the other golden Kirin that had turned invisible. Seeing that he could finally track the beast's movements, Hanli finally breathed an inward sigh of relief. Otherwise, having something so undetectable lurking nearby, he really wouldn't have been able to rest easy. The two golden Kirin's escape speed wasn't actually very fast. It was just slightly faster than a normal flight speed, so Hanli could naturally follow behind the two beasts with ease. Dozens of feet away, he naturally encountered many cultivators from the inner palace along the way. They were all stunned to see Hanli's unfamiliar face. But then, after seeing the golden wine pair running ahead, they immediately seemed to understand and moved aside. It seemed they were very familiar with this beast. However, Hanli's nascent soul stage cultivation also caused several high-level cultivators to show looks of astonishment on their faces, but they still didn't dare to step forward and stop him. Following this beast, Hanli turned one way, then another, winding around several buildings, and arrived before a stone gate built into a mountain cliff. This stone gate wasn't very large, 5 or 6 jong high, but its entire body emitted a faint yellow glow. Talismans flickered endlessly on its surface. It seemed as if someone had placed an extremely powerful restriction upon it. Hanli stopped in his tracks. He narrowed his eyes and halted his escaping light. The golden wine pair's figure flashed and vanished directly into the stone gate. It was as if it were an incorporeal body. Before Hanli could even react, the stone gate flashed with light and let out a boom, rumbling as it opened. It revealed a crystalline, shimmering passage. The walls of this passage were all coated in a thick layer of frost, like the entrance to an ice cave, and the pair of golden wine pairs were standing at the passage entrance, looking back at Hanli with their small, darting eyes. Just then, the other one, which had been invisible, also revealed its form. Fellow Taoist Han, please come in. This old man is somewhat inconvenienced, so forgive me for not being able to rise and greet you from afar. A low chuckle sounded in Hanli's ear. Hanli raised an eyebrow. Without a second word, he strode forward and went inside. When the pair of golden wine pears saw Hanli follow, they immediately turned around and dashed down the passage. Hanli followed the climate as it changed. After several turns through the winding passage, he felt the chill in the tunnel grow even more sinister, and he silently began to head downwards. A thought struck him. Without pausing, he headed down without any hesitation. After about the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, Hanli realized the surrounding temperature had almost reached the point where the air itself would turn to ice. He had finally reached the end of the passage. With a flash of his silhouette, he entered a vast, white hall, and this hall was built entirely from a type of translucent jade, its surface emitting wisps of cold air. It was actually built from 10,000-year mystic ice. The moment Hanli stepped into this hall, he couldn't help but shiver involuntarily, but immediately, a purple glow flowed across his body, and he instantly felt as if nothing had happened. So, it's true. Fellow Taoist Han really does possess the extreme cold flame. A slightly surprised voice came from the middle of the hall. Hanli's gaze flickered as he looked over. To his surprise, he cried out, "Qianlan Yan." In the four corners of the hall, there was a giant golden pillar, each so thick a person could barely wrap their arms around it, and in the center, there was a giant blue cauldron, 5 to 6 zhang in diameter. Wisps of faint blue flames rose from within the cauldron. That strange cold, that spiritual pressure, was the Qianlan Yan that Hanli was so familiar with. How could he not be utterly shocked? Fellow Taoist Han also recognizes the Qianlan Yan. This surprises this old man even more. A soft, questioning voice came from behind the cauldron. Then, a figure moved, and from behind it walked out a dwarf, 3 feet tall. His face was covered in deep wrinkles, with a long, snow-white beard. Wearing a blue robe, he looked at Hanli with a trace of surprise on his face. "You are the venerable Hanli, fellow Taoist." Hanli's expression instantly returned to normal. He cupped his hands and asked politely, "That's right. This old man is indeed Hanli. However, the title Venerable Hanli, is just an honorific for the great elder of the lesser auspice palace of each generation. This old man's real name is Xiang, but not many people know it anymore." "Ju are you?" said the Hanli, his eyes flashing. He then casually raised his hand. A technique seal struck one of the golden pillars in the corner. Instantly, a white light flashed. The floor of the great hall began to glow brightly. Several off-white cushions materialized out of thin air. "I rarely have guests here, so I don't usually prepare tables and chairs. I hope you can forgive me, fellow Taoist." "Ju are you?" said with a pleasant expression. "You are too kind, fellow Taoist. We cultivators don't need to be so formal." Hanli smiled faintly. He calmly walked over and sat cross-legged on one of the cushions. His gaze was still fixed on the large cauldron. As he looked at it again, he realized that this medicinal gathering cauldron was 70 to 80% similar to the Zhutia cauldron, and its divine abilities were quite extraordinary. The power of the frigid aura was completely contained within this cauldron, without the slightest bit leaking out. Otherwise, this hall would have long been frozen solid. How could anyone have entered it? But this, in turn, made him even more suspicious. Although I haven't spoken in detail with fellow Taoist Han, my intuition tells me that you are, more than likely, the one this old man has bitterly searched for so many years. The venerable Hanli sat down on another cushion opposite Hanli. He said to Hanli with a sincere expression, "For the venerable one to say such a thing, this Han is completely baffled. Fellow Taoist, could you please explain in detail your purpose for inviting me here?" Hanli forcefully suppressed the shock and doubt in his heart. Slowly said, "Brother Han, you need not be overly concerned. I invited you here, fellow Taoist, because I learned that you could consume Tibinglan fruits in a row and act as if nothing happened. That gave me an idea. But now that I see you cultivate the extreme cold eye, there's no need for any further tests. You, fellow Taoist, are truly the person I have been searching for." Venerable Hanli said with a broad smile on his face. "The person you've been looking for? What do you mean by that?" Hanli asked with a slight frown. "Could I first ask the name of the purple flames on your body, Brother Han? Although I know of several types of purple flames, I have never heard of one with an ice attribute. I hope fellow Taoist can enlighten me." Venerable Hanli's expression turned serious, as he asked solemnly, "These flames on my body, are something I cultivated haphazardly. They don't have a formal name, but for convenience, I call them the Ziluoji fire. Perhaps they can't compare to the Qianlan Binyan, but their power is still quite decent. Hanli looked down at the flickering purple flames on his body, and said nonchalantly, before understanding the other party's true intentions, how could he reveal the true power of these flames? But when Venerable Hanli heard what Hanli said, he seemed very satisfied. He said with a smile, "What you say is not false. I can see that while this Ziluoji fire seems to be a single entity, it is in fact bitingly cold and sharp, and rather impure. Indeed, it has not been through a specialized, ice-attribute cultivation method for refinement. Otherwise, its power could be raised to a whole new level. But I specifically refined this fire back then. What further refinement could it possibly need?" Hanli was stunned, somewhat taken aback. "Ha ha, it seems Brother Han doesn't know very much about his own flames. This kind of cold flame is rare in this world, but each type, aside from its initial refinement and use, can be further refined and purified using special secret arts to further increase its power. Of course, the final power, how much it increases, depends on the degree of your refinement and the inherent power of the cold flame itself. But setting other things aside, if this dry blue ice flame, for example, were refined to its absolute limit, its power could be increased several times over." Zhu Ryu stroked his beard, glanced at the giant cauldron, and said with great interest, "Several times over, you say? Could it be that this is a type of purified flame?" Hanli drew in a sharp breath, but then he seemed to remember something. He suddenly raised one finger, and a wisp of deep purple flame appeared, flickering unceasingly. "This is indeed a refined cold flame. It just seems it hasn't been completely purified. Fellow Taoist, you obtained this by forcefully compressing it with your spiritual power, didn't you? Such a crude method not only wastes a great deal of your power, but I estimate you can only manage to refine this single wisp of pure flame." The Reverend was not surprised. He replied faintly, "Thank you for the guidance. Fellow Taoist, you can now tell me why you are looking for me." Hanli was silent for a moment. He looked up at Zhu Ryu and said, "Before I answer that question, I have another question I'd like to ask you. Fellow Taoist, very few people know of the dry blue ice flame, yet you recognize this flame at a single glance. Have you perhaps seen it somewhere else?" After saying this, the Reverend's eyes flashed with a golden light, and he stared at Zhu Ryu without blinking.